Hello everyone out there. I was just putting the finishing touches on my son's Euro mount from his buck he shot last fall, and I said, you know what, it's June 1st. Most everyone's got their elk or deer tags for this fall. Why don't I do a how-to video? So this video, I'm going to detail how you can fly from East Coast or West Coast or vice versa for a hunt, and I'm going to tell you some tips and tricks. I'm going to tell you which airline to use, how to get your baggage there, some logistical considerations, and what to do if you get an animal down, how to fly that animal back on a plane. Again, some of you prefer to drive. That's certainly a viable option. For me, coming from Maryland, going out to western states, I really don't have that time. That's a 48, 50-hour drive, depending on which state I'm going to, maybe a little shorter if I'm going to Colorado. But nonetheless, I prefer to fly, and I'm going to tell you how you can do it too, so stay tuned. Okay, first off, so getting the logistics together, if you're doing an elk hunt or in September, for instance, picking an airline to fly with, and I'll tell you which airline I fly with and why. So in the US, you really have the big four. You got United, Delta, American Airlines, and Southwest. I typically choose Southwest, and again, I'm not necessarily a big fan of Southwest. They used to be a great airline a decade ago, and they've been quite unreliable as of late. Nonetheless, they do allow you 2 free check bags, a carry-on bag, and a personal item. And this is huge because you're very limited on the amount of gear you can take when flying out opposed to driving. So that's one pro and con right there. But that extra baggage is very important. Now that doesn't mean you can't fly with Delta, United, or American. Just recognize that you're gonna have some extra money tied up in baggage fees. So right off the bat, I will take a suitcase and I will put my Mystery Ranch Beartooth 80 in that suitcase, and I'll tell you why I do that. So that's one piece of checked baggage. Then the other piece of checked baggage will be my bow case, and I'll take out half the padding in my bow case and fill it full of my elk hunting clothes. That's just a sort of a force multiplier there. And then my my carry-on bag will be a soft-sided cooler, and in there I will put important electronic items, things that I can't lose, an extra bow release, for instance. So yeah, I live near an airport. I live near BWI, so you have to deal with the airline traffic while I'm making a video about which airline to choose. So as I mentioned, and in addition to my carry-on cooler, I have a personal item that'll usually be my day pack for hiking out there. I don't usually hunt with my Mystery Ranch Beartooth 80 on, and I'll keep a couple other items in there: GPS, binoculars, things that you don't really want to check because you don't trust the sticky fingers of the baggage handlers with, or you want to make sure you get out on your hunt. So in terms of cost, so you're looking at, on average, I typically look at like a 7 or 8 day hunt, and I like to do midweek hunts, meaning like fly in on a Tuesday or Wednesday and fly out on a Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, something like that. One, the flights tend to be cheaper then, and then two, I like flying in and getting there before the hustle and bustle of the weekend is hitting at the trailhead. You get a couple days of less pressured hunts on average. Then you got that weekend hustle and bustle, and then you get a couple less pressured hunts on days of hunting on the back end of that on average. So with Southwest, flying from Maryland out west, whether it's Montana, Idaho, Arizona, it's typically going to cost me about $500, $250 each way. That may vary. Again, if you're flying from Austin, Texas, it might be different if you're flying from Boston, Massachusetts. So again, about $500 I'll allot for airfare. I like to go with, if possible, 2 to 3 buddies, what I recommend. I usually actually travel alone and I'm meeting friends on the ground, but 2 to 3, even 4 guys would be about perfect. That helps split up some of these costs, so that's something to keep in mind. And you can take more gear, divide and conquer. Everyone doesn't need to take a first aid kit, for instance, one tent, or for one person can put the tent, the other person can have the tent stakes in their check luggage, for instance. So once I get to my airport, hopefully within 4 or 5 hours of driving, I got to get a rental car, I got to get groceries for the week, and one other thing that you're going to typically need if you're bow hunting is a target. I will usually go to Walmart, pick up a target for about $50. That way I can resight in my bow. I can leave that target behind, give it to someone when I'm done, but it's very important having camp, shoot an arrow every day. So that's another cost you have to think about, and that's really a cost you're not going to get your money back, and you're going to spend that money, use that target for the week, and then give it away to someone if you can. Now, once I get to my airport destination, again, whether whatever western state it's in, I will have groceries ordered at Walmart ahead of time, if possible. This is a very nice service because you can sit down when you're not rushed, think about what gear you need, have that order, have it waiting for you. So get your rental car, and I'll tell you how to get a rental car in a minute. Get your rental car, go to Walmart, pick up your groceries for the week, and head out. And hopefully you got a short enough drive or enough time allowed from your flights that you can make it to camp with a couple hours of daylight left. I typically like to get into camp, set up camp. Setting up camp in the dark is no fun. Set up camp while you got some daylight and head out on the mountain, even if you got an hour, hour and a half of daylight left, just to listen for bugles, just get a lay of the land, something like that. Now, when it comes to rental cars, the cost, as many of you know, have increased exorbitantly over the last decade. When I first started doing this, I could get a rental pickup truck for a week for about $200 or $300. Now it's probably going to cost you between $500 and $700. I typically use Costco. Wow, these ravens are really having a ball over here. Sorry about that. I typically use Costco. They have rental cars available, so if you have a Costco membership, I can usually find the best deals there. If you don't, try autoslash.com, put in the type of car you need. So what type of rental car do you need? You don't necessarily need a four-wheel drive truck, especially if you're just hunting from trailheads in September. It's good to have, but oftentimes when renting a car, there's not really a checkbox for four-wheel drive. It's just full-size pickup truck or whatnot. I've gotten away with mid-size and full-size SUVs oftentimes. Again, it depends on your needs, how many people are traveling with you. And again, if you have a couple guys, you can split those costs, defray some of those costs. But you're looking at, we'll say between $500 and $700 for a rental car for a week. One second, let me scare this raven away. All right, hopefully he'll stop for a little bit. Okay, so you get out, you have a nice successful hunt. Again, like I said, I like to leave on typically a Tuesday or Wednesday and have a 6 or 7, 8 day hunt, come back, get a hotel room, and then depart the next day. So you're in camp, you hunt a couple days, and you're very fortunate. You get an elk down, an elk or a deer, but we'll say an elk because that's sort of like a worst case scenario. It's a big animal. How am I going to get it back? What do I need to do? And this is what really scares a lot of people from flying, but it can totally be done. I've done it a number of years. I've been successful, and I've even got decent sized bulls back, and I have some videos showing that. So the number one logistical problem that you're going to face is getting your meat frozen. Yes, I know it's tough to get an elk off the mountain, figure that out, but you have to find a way to get your meat frozen. And if you're doing a drop camp somewhere and you don't have any friends out there, it's best to, ahead of time, figure out a game processor, a butcher in that area, and just ask them, say, hey, I recognize you might not be able to do a rush butcher job, with 2 days, in September, right in the middle of archery season. But can you just freeze a quarter or two of elk for me, solid? Because your meat has to be frozen solid to get on the plane. So call around, find a place that's able to do that, have a backup to your backup. Because again, this is a stressor that most people find themselves in. They don't even think about it. They get an elk down and they're like, oh, I'll just take it on the plane. That meat has to be frozen. So you got to find a way to get this done. Again, I don't want to overemphasize this point, but it can be a very stressful point. It has been for me. So have a backup to a backup of being able to get your meat frozen. If possible, do a rush butcher job. Here's where that carry-on bag really comes important, that carry-on cooler I mentioned. In my carry-on cooler that I can take, and with carry-on bags, you're not limited to weight, I can fit both back straps, both tenderloins, and some trim meat from a large bull elk. Sorry about that. The plane traffic is pretty busy around here. The airlines are doing well. So in my carry-on, I can fit a tenderloin, a back strap, both back straps, both tenderloins, and some trim meat from a bull elk. And you have no problems with the cow or deer. That's very important because your carry-on bag is not limited to weight. So I'll be walking through the airport with 60 pounds in that carry-on cooler, but it's some of the best meat, and it'll stay frozen, no problem. Again, get it frozen first and it'll stay frozen. The other issue is what I'll do with that suitcase. Remember I told you I put my Mr. Ranch bag in a suitcase. I'll use that suitcase so I don't have to go out and buy an extra cooler, depending on the size of the elk or the deer. And I'll put some of my hunting clothes in that suitcase insulation, and then put the frozen meat in that suitcase, zip it up. I typically fly, I've flown from Idaho, had a decent layover in Denver, and by the time I get home, 12 hours later in Maryland, that meat is still frozen solid. It's not a problem. I know a lot of people freak out about that, but you gotta think, underneath the plane at 30 and 40,000 feet, it's minus 40 degrees, that compartment's not insulated, your meat will stay fine. Now, if you got a 6-hour layover in September in Las Vegas, you might want to think differently, but for the most part, I haven't had any problems getting that meat back frozen. So one other tip I'll tell you too is, as I mentioned, I typically do a 7 or 8 day hunt. That last evening, I will get a hotel in town by the airport. You're not going to be able to get an elk out that last morning anyway, unless you're going to cancel your flight. So come into town, get a shower, maybe do some laundry, just freshen up. But importantly, it gives you time to take care of some logistical challenges. If you maybe need to run out to Walmart or Sportsman's and get a cooler. If you get a nice bull elk down, what are you going to do about that? And I'll explain in a moment what you do there. But I typically like to get like a Residence Inn or some hotel like that. And these hotels have suites in them where they'll have a mid-sized refrigerator freezer. And this is important because, again, you can shove your meat in there and help keep it cool, freeze it again before the plane, because you might pick it up at a butcher 2 to 3 hours away from that airport. You still got to keep that meat frozen overnight before you fly out. So I tend to fly out on a later flight, like a mid-afternoon, from noon on flight, to get back to the East Coast, because that gives me mornings to run around, again, take care of logistical considerations. And when flying back, I like to give myself 3 hours at the airport. Now, I usually don't do that for domestic flights. Usually I can get in 45 minutes to an hour and I'm fine. However, you got a ton of gear to check, maybe some antlers to check, meat to check. You don't want to leave yourself shortchanged, okay? So I will get to that airport early, on average like 3 hours before the flight. What I will do, if I've been successful and gotten an elk or deer down, I will park in short-term parking and drop the majority of my bags off and just keep the carry-on bag and maybe my carry-on backpack with me. That way, you're not trying to juggle 6, 7, 8 bags. It's too much for 1 or 2 people. So drop that off, then take your rental car back, take the shuttle back to the airport, and then go finish your check-in process, go through TSA. I'll also say this, the TSA airport check-ins out west have, I don't know, they do a thorough job, I'll say. I don't know if they're trying to justify their existence or whatnot, but I've had them on multiple occasions have me totally empty my bags, take all my frozen meat out of my carry-on to put it back in. Just leave yourself adequate time. I don't want to say anything demeaning. Also, again, back to the hotel, those residents in hotels like that, and may or may not have butchered an elk in a hotel before and frozen it, or at least finished some of the trim jobs before flying out the next day. I won't admit to that, but it's helpful if you have a hotel like that, so that's the option. The other thing too is you can call the hotel and say, hey, I'm coming into town, I might have some elk meat with or deer meat with me. Do you have some extra freezer space that I could use? And surprisingly, I haven't had any problem asking the front desk employees for that, and they've obliged me. Now, it might be nice to carry a couple tens and slide their way for the help there, but $20 to keep your meat frozen overnight is well worth the money. Now, what do you do if you've shot a large bull elk or a large mule deer and you want to get it back? You can bring it back and do a Euro mount, which I've done, and I have videos, and I'll post a link up here of a video of me bringing back an elk. What I do is put tennis balls on it. Now, the key problem with any type of antlered animal, and with CWD regulations, check your state and your state you're bringing your meat back to, or your skull back to, is you need to boil that skull. So, I don't know, you're going to have to find a pot or pan or somewhere or something from Goodwill and find a way to boil that skull. You're not going to be able to just cut the meat off of it. Airlines don't want any drippy brain matter on anyone else's suitcase, and I certainly can't blame them. So the other logistical challenge, again, if you shoot a big animal is, and if you're trying to get it back on the airplane, you got to find a way to boil that skull. That can be a challenge too. So think creative ahead of time. Again, this is one problem you'll face. This is a good problem. You shot a big elk, you want to get it back. Now, in terms of taxidermy, nothing against Western taxidermists. They probably know the anatomy of the elk just as well, if not better, than the East Coast taxidermists. I still want to bring that elk back to the East Coast, and I'll tell you why. If you shoot an elk, a big bull elk with a 35, 50-inch spread, taxidermist does a great job, even if they're a couple $100 cheaper. Creating that elk and then shipping it back to the East Coast instead of hundreds of dollars, that's going to cost you $1,000. That's a very large crate. Not something you want to do. So bring your elk, bring your hide back, pay the extra, overage and baggage fees. It might be $300 or $400, but you got your skull back, you got your hide back. Leave it to your East Coast taxidermist, and then you can pick it up from there instead of trying to have an elk mounted out west and ship it back. The other option is you can fly one way if you get a big bull down, and then you can cancel your one-way flight back and get a rental car and drive back. Again, these are good problems to have. I'm sure most of you would be tickled to death. You shoot a Pope and Young bull and got to figure out, hey, what are we going to do? But they're the options. So for getting your meat back, as I mentioned, I got that suitcase. I have my carry-on cooler. That can usually get most of the meat back. Sometimes I will need to get a separate cooler. I'll just go get a cheap cooler at Walmart. Here's another tip. Keep that under 50 pounds, okay? So we'll say the cooler weighs 5 pounds. Put 45, 43 pounds of meat, frozen meat in it. Duct tape it shut. TSA sometimes will cut that duct tape, so I'll put a duct tape roll in the cooler for them and say, hey, please re-duct tape, because you don't want that cooler popping open and your frozen bag, frozen meat spilling out underneath the plane. And I've been able to bring most of my elk back for 2 extra bags. And on Southwest, that runs $75. So for $150, I've been able to get my elk meat back. Again, I got some in that suitcase, the back straps, tenderloins, and some trim meat. You're not limited to weight here in that carry-on cooler. And then I'll have an extra cooler or 2 And I've been able to get a full elk back that way. A deer is going to be smaller, so maybe only one extra cooler worth of meat with the carry-on cooler. Now, again, it can be quite challenging if you're by yourself at the airport trying to juggle all these bags. So I recommend, again, dropping that rental car off last, drop off in short-term parking, move the majority of your bags, then take the shuttle back after dropping a rental car and check the remainder of your bags. So I think that's all I can think of. Let me know if this is your first time going out west and you found this video helpful. If you have any additional hints, please drop them in the comments. Any questions, I'm happy to respond. I've been doing this for a while. My way is certainly not the only way, but hopefully you found this video helpful, and I appreciate the dialogue. Have a good one.